Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Digging Deeper moment number 166. We are so glad that you've joined us. Hey, could you do me a favor and subscribe to our YouTube channel either before or after you view this lesson? This will help us a lot. Thank you. In our last two Digging Deeper moments, we began looking at the 10 ways Genesis 1 is interpreted and the 7 assumptions these interpretations build on. Last week, we looked at the day-age theory and theistic evolution and the framework theories. Tonight, we start with the title theory, also called the heading theory. This sees Genesis chapter 1, and especially Genesis 1:1, as a heading, as a title. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. They see this as a heading or a title or a summary of the entire creation week, which follows in Genesis 1:2 through 31. This means that the days of creation are to be taken as symbolic or in a metaphoric sense. They are not a normal 7 24-hour they're not normal 7 24-hour days. According to this view, verse 1 is simply a heading. The actual account of creation of the heavens and the earth takes place in Genesis 1:2 through 31. The title theory assumes theism over naturalism, that there is a God. It assumes an old universe, about 13.8 billion years or so. Creating a way for the Genesis text to allow for an old universe is the primary driver behind this theory. It assumes that Genesis 1 is highly poetic, meaning the days of creation aren't literal days, and they can be stretched to allow for millions and billions of years. The creation account, according to this theory, is also incremental, which we talked and defined as uniformitarianism, that it's not instantaneous. So that's what they assume, that creation takes place in an incremental way. They also assume that the universe is designed, that God's involved, and that we also can gain knowledge through observation and revelation. That means through science and through Scripture. And this title theory also assumes the existence of objective truth. Now, the first 4 theories, the day-age theory, the theistic evolution theory, I'm having a hard time talking today, the framework theory, and the title theory are pretty straightforward and easy to describe. In the day-age theory, the 7 days of creation are long periods of time. In the theistic evolution theory, God used macroevolution to create all that now exists. In the framework theory, the days of Genesis 1 provide a literary and theological framework for explaining creation, and it's not a historical account. And in the title theory, Genesis 1:1 is simply a heading or a summary of all the creation events which take place in the rest of Genesis chapter 1. It's pretty simple. But the next 6 theories are a little bit more difficult to explain and will require digging into the Genesis 1 text a little bit deeper. So the 5th theory that we begin with is called the dependent clause theory. This theory is about the relationship between Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 and Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. The traditional interpretation of these 2 verses, which dates back to the time before Christ, is as the following. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. The traditional interpretation translates the first 3 words in the beginning as an independent clause. Now, I know this is a little technical, but just hang with me. This means that verse 1 stands on its own and provides a complete thought. An independent clause is part of an independent sentence which completes a thought, so you don't need anything else for the sentence to make sense. So Genesis 1:1 is a complete thought according to the traditional interpretation which dates back before the time of Christ. And it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's a complete thought. It doesn't need anything else to make it a complete thought. Now, the dependent clause view takes Genesis 1:1 to be a dependent sentence, meaning that it's not a complete thought and that it actually needs verse 2 with its 3 clauses to make sense of it. So it translates Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 as, in the beginning, when God created. Now, this may seem like semantics on the surface, but the difference in these 2 views has a tremendous impact on theology. If the traditional interpretation, which is the independent view, if this is correct, that verse 1 is an independent sentence versus the dependent view that is a dependent sentence, if the independent traditional view is correct, Genesis 1:1 is a complete sentence, meaning that the first thing God created was the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:2 then is a parenthetical, like a parenthesis, an added thought, which adds information and explains things about verse 1, but verse 1 is not dependent upon verse 2 to explain it. It's just added detail. So it means that God first created the heavens and the earth, and verse 2 then means the earth was formless and empty and covered with water when He created it. Now, if the non-traditional, dependent translation is correct, it means that in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void and covered with water when he started working on it. So in other words, both interpretations affect theology, what we believe is happening or what God is saying happened. The independent view means that verse 2 describes what the earth was after God initially created it. Now, the dependent view means that the earth was formless, void, and covered with water when God began creating. The difference is the starting point of creation. Did God start with nothing, or did God start with chaos and a watery world? That's the difference between the independent view, which has verse 1 as an independent sentence that makes sense on its own, and the dependent view, which we are talking about now. Now, all ancient pagan accounts of creation begin with a watery chaos and/or pre-existing material. Only the traditional view of creation, the independent view that says Genesis 1:1 is an independent sentence, and the first thing that God did was create something, the creation of heavens and earth out of nothing, stands different than all the pagan accounts. And this is the hotly debated point of argument between these two views. Now, my goal in this Digging Deeper moment is not to weigh in on the debate. My goal is to let you know what this view of the dependent view basically holds and show its assumptions. And so that way, when you go into these and you hear and you read things, you can kind of have a feel for what you're reading and know that we're not reading pure Bible when we make certain statements and when we make certain theological statements. So the first assumption about the non-traditional dependent view is theism, that God does exist. The second assumption is that we have an old universe still of 13.8 billion years or even more. Again, a lion's share of the motivation for this theory, the dependent view theory, is to biblically explain or give room in the text for an old universe. The third assumption is that Genesis 1 is highly poetic, which means you don't have to take it concrete, literal, or 7 days. The fourth is uniformitarianism, that the universe came into existence slowly, incrementally, not instantaneously. The fifth assumption about the dependent view is that God designed the universe. Sixth, it also assumes we can get information through observation, that's science, and revelation scripture. And finally, the seventh assumption is that objective truth exists. But we're out of time, and we'll have to pick it up here next week with the gap theory. If this lesson has helped you, please share it with a friend, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or check out our Sunday morning live podcast on either Apple or Spotify. And please don't forget, if you haven't already done so, to subscribe to our YouTube channel. God bless you, and I hope to see you next week.